Welcome to Guide Mia. Today we're going to talk about orthodontic planning and staging in Cympha Studio. This is the designer's lecture, for clinicians and designers doing staging work directly in the browser, whether you're reviewing a case from the lab or adjusting staging before exporting an updated plan back to Guide Mia Ortho Plus. By the end you'll know how to navigate a treatment plan step by step, open the movement chart and restage a tooth's movement, toggle and edit IPR clearance, push fine adjustments with the tooth movement panel, and round-trip the case XML between Studio and Ortho Plus. This is the deepest of the Studio lectures, 15 to 20 minutes for your first case, 5 to 10 per case after that. Follow along on screen, or listen now and read the written guide later. Let's get into it. Here's the arc of this lecture. First, the case bar, the control surface at the bottom of the viewer that everything else hangs off, the step slider, playback, and the toggles. Second, the movement chart, the per tooth staging grid, where you'll learn to read the blue blocks, inspect any cell, and restage a movement by dragging it to a different step. Third, the IPR overlay, what the colored labels mean and how to edit clearance values directly in the three-dimensional view. Fourth, the tooth movement panel, for millimeter and degree fine adjustment of individual teeth. And finally the payoff, the XML round trip that keeps Studio and the desktop Ortho Plus planner synchronized without shipping the full mesh archive back and forth. Each piece builds on the last, so this one rewards watching in order. 2 prerequisites, and both are hard requirements. First, the case format. Studio opens orthodontic cases from a Guide Mia review file, the GVW archive, or from a step archive. But the deep dive controls in this lecture, the movement chart, IPR, and the case XML actions, require the Guide Mia format specifically. Step archives will play back their steps, but they don't expose the authoring controls. So if you're here to stage, make sure you have the GVW file. Second, screen width. The movement chart and IPR buttons on the case bar only appear at viewport widths of about 1024 pixels or more. On a narrower window they're simply hidden, not broken, hidden. Widen the window or move to an external monitor before you start hunting for buttons that aren't there. Everything happens at studio.cympha.com, no install. Start by switching the workspace nav to orthodontics, the hamburger menu narrows to the actions ortho work needs, DICOM, the Ortho Plus plan, optical scans, articulation, pictures, and so on. Then load the case, and you have several equivalent doors. Open Ortho Plus plan for a local file is the usual one. Open optical scan file also accepts the case formats. Open URL takes a hosted link, subject to the usual cross-origin rules. Or just drag the file onto the viewer. And a convenience, a case deep link in the URL switches you to the orthodontics workspace automatically. However you load it, wait until the progress indicator clears and the teeth appear in 3 dimensions. The moment the plan is ready, the floating case bar appears at the bottom of the viewer, and that bar is the control surface for everything that follows, so let's read it carefully. Left to right. The step slider shows the current step against the maximum, 5 of 24 style. Drag it, and note the scene updates when you release the pointer, not on every tick, deliberately, so the model isn't rebuilding while you scrub. Once the slider has keyboard focus, the arrow keys, home, end, and page up and down move the step and apply immediately. Next, the transport, previous and next single step and disable at the ends, while play advances 1 step every 200 milliseconds until the final step, then stops, it does not wrap to step 0. And starting play automatically turns the IPR overlay off if it was on, so the labels never lag the moving model. Then the 2 authoring toggles, movement chart and IPR, and the XML actions will finish with. 1 habit to build now, the status line at the bottom is where Studio reports successes, errors, and hints. Whenever a control seems to do nothing, look there first. Click the table icon and the movement by step panel opens as a floating window, drag its header to park it wherever it doesn't cover the teeth, the position is remembered for the session. Now learn to read the grid, because everything else in this lecture depends on it. Columns are teeth, in universal chart order, with the header row showing FDI numbers. Rows are transition steps, 1 through N, and the subtlety is that row S represents the transition into step S, not the state at step S. The row for the step currently shown in the viewer is highlighted, which keeps you oriented. Inside the grid, blue draggable blocks mark the cells where that tooth has visible movement on that transition. Those blocks are the plan, made tangible. Keyframe-only cells may show a different fill without being draggable. Read a column top to bottom and you're reading one tooth's biography across the whole treatment. Single-click any cell and, after a short delay, the delay is there so a double-click can still register as a double-click, a floating hint opens. It shows the primary staging line from the viewer, and if the cell carries movement, 2 numbers that matter, the step delta, what this single transition moves, and the total delta from step 0, in compact millimeter and degree format. That pair answers the 2 questions you ask most as a designer, how much is happening right here, and how far has this tooth come overall? The hint auto dismisses after about 2 seconds, but hovering over it keeps it open, and leaving it schedules a longer dismiss, so it stays out of your way without vanishing mid-read. Depending on the cell, the hint may also carry editing controls. If one of those actions fails, the reason prints in the status line. Keyboard users get the same thing. Enter or space on a focus cell opens the identical hint, anchored to the cell. Here's the headline feature: shifting when a tooth's movement happens is a drag, not a dialogue. Grab a blue block and drag it vertically within the same tooth column. You can't drag across columns, because that would move the wrong tooth's plan. Drop it on a lower row, a later step, and you postpone the movement. The hold band stretches and the tail shifts. Drop it on a higher row and you pull the movement earlier, but only when the target stays inside the same contiguous movement stage for that tooth. Studio won't let a drag tear a movement out of its stage. The feedback language is worth learning. Valid targets highlight as you hover, invalid targets don't, and an invalid drop is silently ignored. So if nothing lights up under your cursor, that drop isn't going to take. No error dialog, just no highlight. And after a successful drag, Studio suppresses the synthetic click, so the hint doesn't pop open on top of your release point. Step back and look at what this grid really is. Every treatment plan is secretly a schedule: which tooth moves, and when. Traditionally, that schedule lived inside desktop software, and touching it meant a request to whoever ran the planner. Here, the schedule is laid out as a grid you can read at a glance and edit by hand, in a browser. A designer reviewing a labs case can see immediately that a canine starts too early or a molar's movement crowds the finish, and fix it. Drag, done. The chart doesn't replace clinical judgment about what should move, it removes the friction from expressing when. Keep this picture in mind as we move from scheduling to the finer instruments, editing an individual tooth's position, and the interproximal clearances between neighbors. The grid isn't just for reading and scheduling, it's also the launchpad into tooth editing. Double-click a data cell and two things happen at once. The viewer jumps to that step, and Studio enters tooth movement mode for that universal tooth. It's the fastest route from noticing something in the chart to actually adjusting the tooth. But there are rules, and Studio tells you when you've hit one. If the policy doesn't allow adjustment at that tooth and step, a locked keyframe, a fixed pose, you get a toast explaining why, and nothing moves. No silent failure, no mystery. If you want to jump the viewer without picking a tooth, double-click the row header, the step number. Instead, the viewer moves to that step and the column selection clears. Two gestures, two intents. Cell means step plus tooth, header means step only. Once tooth movement mode is active, the panel that opens next is where the precision lives. The tooth movement panel opens at lower left whenever tooth movement is active, from a grid double-click, or from double-clicking a tooth directly in the three-dimensional view. The title confirms the tooth number and jaw, so you always know what you're about to move. For each axis you get translate in millimeters and rotate in degrees, and each row carries three controls: a numeric step size, minus and plus buttons that move exactly one step, and a slider for a continuous push. The slider has a behavior worth understanding: drag it, and on release Studio applies the accumulated delta and resets the slider to 0. It's a velocity control, not a position control, so repeated pushes accumulate. Changing the tooth or the case step resets the fine sliders too. If the current step disallows adjustment, you get a toast rather than a silent no op. And the gizmo on the tooth still works in parallel: drag the axes to translate, the rings to tilt, so the usual rhythm is gizmo for coarse, panel for fine. Click the IPR icon and the overlay projects labels and lines near the interproximal contacts along the arch. The color language: greenish means gap, positive clearance, and reddish means collision or overlap, negative. When contacts crowd together, labels fan out slightly so they stay readable. Editing is direct: click a numeric label and a popover opens with a clearance field in millimeters, negative meaning collision, positive meaning gap. Type the value, then commit with enter or apply. Escape, cancel, or clicking outside closes without applying, deliberate, so a stray click can't change a clinical value, but it also means a half-finished edit silently evaporates. Commit explicitly. On commit, Studio adjusts the contact and performs distal translations on both teeth, in mesial to distal order, to realize the new clearance. 2 footnotes: play turns the overlay off automatically, so re-toggle it after playback. And the clinical responsibility note: these values drive automated tooth shifts. Verify against your treatment plan and local regulations before committing them to a finalized case. Now the piece that makes browser staging useful to a desktop pipeline. The case XML is the compact brain of the plan: tooth transforms, staging metadata, keyframe flags, and exchanging it keeps the two applications in sync without shipping the full mesh archive. Studio to Ortho Plus. Finish your edits, click the download icon on the case bar, and Studio exports the current case as an XML named after the case base name. Import or merge it in Ortho Plus. The reverse: export from the desktop, click the upload icon in Studio, and pick the file. Parse errors and mismatched cases show in an alert. One boundary: XML doesn't carry meshes, so if mesh assets changed in Ortho Plus, open a fresh case archive instead. And for signed-in users whose case came from a remote URL, the Cloud Up icon uploads the current XML right next to the source archive in the cloud. The case in Cympha picks it up on its next load. No download and re-upload dance. Last step: sharing and wrap-up. For a single shareable file with your current plan, click Download on the top toolbar. The browser saves the case to your download folder. For the richer record, remember the media gallery on the top toolbar. It holds your screen captures and added pictures alongside any case media that came inside the archive, and saving the whole workspace as a Cympha project from the hamburger menu keeps captures, captions, and the scene together in one reopenable bundle. And what does done look like? After the XML round trip, the case is genuinely in sync. The next reviewer can open either Studio or Ortho Plus and see your staging changes, your IPR adjustments, and your tooth moves. That's the whole promise of this workflow. The browser is a first-class seat at the planning table, not a read-only preview. 6 complaints cover almost every support thread on this workflow, so let's do 3 and 3. First, the movement chart and IPR icons simply aren't showing. 2 possible reasons, and check them in this order. They're desktop only and need a viewport of about 1024 pixels or more, so widen the browser window or move to an external monitor. If they still don't appear at full width, the case isn't a guide me or review file. Step archives don't expose those controls at all. Second, a drag in the movement chart won't drop. Studio rejects drops that violate the staging rules, dragging into the wrong column, or pulling a movement earlier to a target outside its contiguous movement stage. And here's the feedback language to internalize, because Studio is quiet about it: invalid targets don't highlight. If no highlight appears under your cursor as you hover, that drop is not going to be accepted, and releasing will do nothing. Third, you double-click a tooth and get a tooth move block toast. Policy at that step forbids manual adjustment, usually because it's a fixed keyframe, or a step that doesn't own that tooth's transition. Move to a different step, try a transition row where that tooth actually has a blue block, and try again. And the second 3. IPR clearance edits that don't persist. The popover has to be committed, with enter or with apply. A click outside the popover cancels without applying. That is intentional, so an accidental click can never change a clinical value, but it's genuinely easy to miss when you're moving fast. Reopen the label and commit explicitly. Next, an XML upload that alerted with errors. Either the file didn't parse, or it doesn't match the case that's loaded. Re-export from Ortho Plus, confirm the case identifier lines up, and try again, and read the status line at the bottom, because it often carries a more specific second message that the alert doesn't show. Finally, the cloud upload icon isn't visible at all. 2 conditions have to both be true for it to appear. You must be signed in, and the case must have been opened from a remote URL, such as a Cympha case link, rather than from a local file. The reason is concrete rather than arbitrary. Cloud upload writes the XML next to the source archive, so the case has to have a known cloud sibling object to write next to. Open a local file, and there's nowhere for it to go. The written guide walks all 10 steps with every keyboard shortcut and every rule spelled out. Cympha.com, docs, how to adjust ortho planning and staging in Cympha Studio. This series is doing exactly this for every Cympha workflow, one lecture at a time, so subscribe if that's useful to you. Thanks for watching, see you in the next one.